I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our Microsoft Access playlist, and we're going to take a look at our Azure database once again, and we're going to take a look at the situation where you've got your application migrated over and it's working great, and you can start to look at optimization or performance enhancements, and one of those is the enhancement to start to move your queries or your generalized queries or views to the Azure SQL backend for speed. And so without further ado, let's get to it. Looking to hire additional resources for your project? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description. Okay guys, so pretty fun one today. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a very common situation in Microsoft Access databases, in databases in general, where there is, dependency between queries and things like that. And in some cases, there's opportunities to rewrite those queries, and in some cases, it's just not possible. And so what I wanted to do today is to show you one of the awesome powers that you're going to have when you start up your Azure SQL backend, because it's really going to speed up some of your more complex processes, and by migrating your queries over, you're really going to benefit from that. And so this diagram that you see in front of you here is basically an anatomy of a moderately complex query, not super complex, but you can see that the yellow squares are tables that make up queries, and the green squares are queries. And you can see, starting at the bottom, that first query on the very bottom, it uses two tables, and then it sort of is used by the second query, which also uses an additional table, and then that query output is used in a third query up on the top left there that also uses the output from another table in yellow, and then that final query that's at the very top uses another query on the right side that uses three tables, and it also, the end query also uses a couple of additional tables. And so what you can see here is sort of like, this is very common when there's all kinds of things like finding the last thing of a particular series and then integrating that into other queries and things like that. And that's what we're going to look at today. Okay, so the process from a high-level view is essentially that we're going to take these queries that we see in Microsoft Access that are accessing our DAO tables, and we're going to move them over to Azure SQL. Then those queries that are in Azure SQL will be 100% functioning exactly the same way that they functioned in Microsoft Access on your Azure tables that you've just migrated over. And if you need to see the previous episode, just check out the card that will appear at the top here. That will take you back to that episode where we actually migrated our Access, or created our Access database on Azure. So these queries are all working on Azure tables at this point, and then we are going to create an Azure linked table, ODBC linked table, to the resultant query, the very end query, leaving all of the processing and everything to do with that query in Azure SQL, which is really awesome because it's much more powerful than Microsoft Access at doing those things. And so why not leverage that power if we are going to Azure-enable our Microsoft Access database? Why would we not use that backend power? The other thing is that there's a very good reason to do this, because the queries actually will be inefficient. They will inefficiently use Azure over ODBC if they've got a whole bunch of queries that are also pulling from ODBC and then needing to assemble themselves all together in Access using ACE or JET, when it's really just not necessary to do that at all. And this is the Access database here. which I created. You can see this Azure database that I created, and I'm pretending that this is my Azure-enabled application. I've actually got all of this dummy data here that is from the AdventureWorks practice database that Microsoft allows us to use, and it has all kinds of products and categories and descriptions and models of things. It's for a sporting goods store, and it has sales order details and sales order headers. And so this gives us an opportunity actually to go ahead and create the query that's going to be basically the kind of query that we would use in a real operational setting that is not very simple. And so I've created these queries already. You can see this is customer last order, and it has essentially two columns, just the customer ID and the last order that in sequential order, ID order. And so a very simple query here. It's just basically got the customer ID and then the maximum of the sales order ID, assuming that the sales order IDs are in sequential order per customer. And then the next query is customer last order header, which is it uses customer last order. And so this one has the last order, and it has all of the detail for that order. And this is the design of customer last order header. Don't worry too much about the design of the actual queries. It's not important for this lesson. You can see this is joining the last customer order, customer last order to sales order header table in order to just show a list of the last orders for every particular customer. But don't worry about the SQL part of it. The main thing is that we have a query here that is sort of operational, and it is the second level of what we're working on. Now the last order items is actually the next one in the list. I'm going to jump to that one, and we'll come back to the customer with address. And as you can see, the last order items, this one has not only the last order, but it has all of the line items for each of those orders. And so that's an important query for our final output, because the final requirement was to have the last order and all the order items on the last order by customer. And so we can take a look at that design, and we can see that it's actually just the last order header, which has the sales order ID joined to the detail table, and that's how that one works. And then next on our list is the customer with address. As we move up the dependency chain there, you can see that that one is used as well. And it uses three tables. It's like a customer table, an address table, and like a join to the address table in order to get that output. So you can see it has a line for every customer with their various addresses, all made up dummy data here, and then we can jump to the last order items with addresses query, and this one has it uses the output. So now we've got the very last order for every customer, plus the line items for the last order, plus the shipping and home addresses for that customer, and so this is sort of like the final query. And as I go through here, you can see it's starting to bog down a bit. You saw it went not responding there for a second, and you can see that it's not very quick to move around. I'm trying to use the arrow keys here to tab or to work through my data, and if I try to go to the very end of the record set, which has only 500 and some records in it, you can see it's just churning away there because all that data is coming from Azure, and then Access is doing the query. So it's actually extremely inefficient because it's not using Azure to do the query. It's actually using Access to pull all the data across the wire and then compare it all and then do the query. So 542 records. You can see how long it took for that simple. Well, it's not a simple query, but just for that output to be produced in Access. Now you may have actually noticed some slowdown when you use Access as well, but it definitely would be faster with all Access tables, just because it's native. It's running natively on there. You can see this is what it looks like. It uses two of the views, those two top or second top level views, customer with address and last order items, and then it just uses the address table and the product table. And it's actually this type of query will slow down in native Access a lot as well sometimes, and usually what you do is you rewrite it to be more efficient, or you might find other ways of doing it using temporary tables or something. But when it's on Azure, what you can do is you can actually move all of this stuff over to Azure, and it makes it way faster because Azure is it's essentially an SQL Server database on the back end. So when you create views on the server, well, being a server-based database, it's going to optimize those, and it's going to make those really, really quick. And so when I open SQL Server Management Studio here, you can see I've opened the Crufty database. This one is one I've used on a couple of different occasions, but I have the tables from the AdventureWorks database in here, and those are the same tables that you see here. So those tables that I just showed you in Azure are actually the same ones that are in Access. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a view here for each of those views that are in Access. And so if I open the views here, you can see there's some views that were created with the AdventureWorks database, get all categories and some other stuff in there. But what we're going to do is we're going to create these queries that we have in Access, and we're going to create them in our Crufty database here so that they will all run on the server and then just return the result set back to Access, which is really fast, like so much faster. Now, we're going to hit new query on our SQL Server Management Studio. Make sure that you check that database up in the left there. It does not say master or something like that. That means that you're in the wrong database. The simple way of doing it is to just click on the database name in the tree and then click new query, and that will get you in the right place. But here we go. So the first one we're going to create, we're going to do these, and when you create the views, when you migrate views over from Access, it's very important to, you have to migrate them in the order, dependency order, so that each view is created, and then when the next view is created in SQL Server, you can, it will use the already created one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the design, go to the drop down under the file there and go to SQL, and then you'll see the text for the query come up, and you're just going to right click and copy that text, and after our create view statement, we can just paste that text to create our view on Azure. And what we can do is now we're going to go, and you'll see there's some red highlighting there, and you can see where there's DBO and there's sales LT there. Well, those are the schema of the database, and so or the owner basically of the database. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have ours qualified. Now, probably 90% of the time, you guys are not going to need to check that. But just in case you have a database that has some schema in it, when you put it in front of the table name in the from clause, it will get rid of that for you, and then your query can be created. So we're just going to say create view, select blah blah blah, paste it in, fix the table names, and then we're going to put a go after that, and that's going to make that one get executed in sequence, and it's going to basically close that off, because create views generally you have to put a go after each one. And so we're going to do the same thing for the next query, customer last order header. We'll copy that SQL just like we did, just paste it right in there exactly as we did the other one. You can see we've got the red highlighting here, and so we'll go ahead and we'll put that sales LT in there on the table name in the from clause. So it might be you might find the table, the offending table, somewhere in the joins, and you just have to make sure you put that schema in front there. And the next one that we'll do is we'll do create view customer with address. That's the next one in our list there. That one's not related to the other two. It's sort of off on its own, if you remember from the diagram there. And you can see this one. It has fields picked out, and it's basically just customer and address data. So we'll do the drop down. We'll choose SQL once again. We'll copy that SQL from there, and I moved some stuff there, so I'll just say yes to save that. And then you can just paste that SQL in and put a go after it, and you are good to go. Now this one has no offending tables by the looks of it. You'll see on the right side that there will be some red ticks along the bar there, but these are actually technically dbo.address, which database owner, and you would have DBO in front of customer as well, because in this case they're two different schema. But what we'll do is, now that address is blue, and that's because address is actually a reserved word. I'm not sure why they designed their database like this, but they probably fixed it later or something. But they also have fields called name in there, which is another reserved word. But anyway, I'm being nitpicky. So, okay, so the next one we're going to do is we're going to create view last order items, which is also on the second to top level of that sort of query structure there. And this one has, like we showed, it has the last order plus the detail, and Access has created the SQL. You can clean it up if you're really good at SQL. You can actually make these prettier for SQL Server, but the reality is you can just paste in the text from, or the SQL from Access. Now this one uses sales order detail, and if I go look at sales order detail, you'll see it has that sales LT there that it belongs to, and so we're going to put that in. And if it had said DBO, we might put a DBO in there, but in this case it looks like that's the only offending one in there, so we're good to go. We can move on to the next one, and we can do the final one, which is the last order items with address. So we'll go create view last order items with address, and that one's going to be the final view that brings everything together from everything below it. And that's actually part of the reason why we have the go statement there, is so that it actually creates the views that are dependent on before you create each one. And so that's very, very handy. So we're going to grab that SQL just like we did for the other ones, and we're going to drop that SQL in. We'll paste it in. It doesn't show, oh yes, there's a couple of errors there. So you can see that, and you can see it's the product. Now the product is also sales LT. So again, in the table statement, so where it says inner join product, or just after the from statement, that's where you'll put that in, and then you'll see that the field selections will clear up. Now one note, One important note is those red squigglies don't always update right away in SQL Server Management Studio. So remember Control-Shift-R, because that, if you're looking at it and it has errors and you're wondering why there's errors, but you don't think they should be there, just go Control-Alt-R and it refreshes it, and you might see those disappear. Okay, and so we got all of our queries in order, and we hit go there on the toolbar, and it looks like now I can see, what did I screw up? Oh, I had something selected when I so you can also run just a specific part of SQL that you have on your screen by selecting it and then hit F5. But if you unselect everything and hit F5, it runs it all. And so I hit F5 there, and it said commands completed successfully. And so we can go and check that. Now we can do that by closing the tables, and we'll go to our views here. You'll see there's nothing there, and we're going to right-click refresh. Now in SQL Server Management Studio, it's not like Access where everything updates automatically. Just remember that. So now if I go to that final query and I go select top 1,000 rows, right-click, see how fast that came up? That was just blisteringly fast compared to what we saw when we were running it on the Access, ODBC with the Access queries, trying to use the ODBC links. And see all the red squigglies there? Like I said before, Control-Shift-R, and then it said, okay, oh, I see that query's there. Now I can remove the errors. But this is very, very fast. It looks great. I'm going to close that one. And now those ones get red squigglies because they already exist, and it's saying you can't create that now because you already created it. So that's something to remember. Okay, so now we've got our big query in Azure, and we've made it, and that's what we wanted to see. And we're going to go ahead and now we're going to link to that query. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename the end result query, the very last step of it. I'm just going to change the name for now, just so that when we link it using a link table, it's not going to screw up the name. And so you can see up above here, this is how I connected to my database for all of the tables with the different owners there. You can see Sales LT and DBO and stuff, and that's how I link the tables for these. But now what we're going to do is we're going to paste in that same connection string that we used before. Now make sure you check out my earlier 2 videos on creating an Azure database backend for Access, and also using Azure Security, using Active Directory. I had a video for that one, so make sure you check out that one as well. And then from here, what we can do is we're going to just create a simple subroutine called link view, and I'm just going to do command.transfer database, and I'll do AC link, and the database type will be ODBC database, just like the tables up above there. And I'm going to use the same connection string, strcnn, and now this is important. We're actually going to link it as a table, because Access and ODBC are actually going to see this view just as a table. And it works just beautifully, works as a table. I need to remember the name here, so I'll grab the name, last order items with address. I'll just copy that text there, because that was the name of the last query that has all the dependencies, and I'll put that in. Now that's the name of the table that we're going to link to, and then we'll call it the same thing in Access on this step here. So basically we're linking to that one, and we should put a DBO dot last order items with address in there. DBO is where our newly created queries are going to go in this case, and so that's sort of like the default. And so we're going to grab that DBO query, and then we're going to bring it back over as the name that we want. I'll hit run. And here we go. So I'll put in my username and my password here for that database, and you'll see this little pop-up comes up and it says select record, unique record identifier. And this is more to do with if you're going to be adding records and things to your table. So you don't really need to choose a unique row for a query. If you know what that is, you can go ahead and do that, but generally you don't have to do that for this step. And then now we can see up here we've got last order items with address, and look how fast that came up compared to before. And if I drop my cursor in here on this, I'm just blast through this record set, no problem, right? I can page down all the way down to 542, move all around. It's like super fast, super snappy compared to when you're running it on Access. And so that's the big benefit that you get. And you guys, what you'll want to do with your Access apps as you move forward is essentially any queries that can move to Azure SQL, you should move to Azure SQL, because your app will be 100 times faster. And you can actually go back after this and you can delete all of those, just like I did there. You can delete all of the source queries and just use the resulting query here, which looks great. It's super fast. You don't need to have all the old stuff cluttering your database if you don't need to have those old queries left in there. And that'll reduce people from using them inadvertently too. So that's how you can do that. That is how you can migrate your big nasty queries from Access to Azure SQL. Need help or coaching on your project? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.